Welcome to Students of Aging, the podcast that honors the incredible journeys and stories of seniors growing older. Tune in and become a part of our community as we redefine what it means to age gracefully and purposefully.
Welcome to Students of Aging, a series of podcasts created by and for older people who share their stories and what it is that's going on in their lives and issues that affect them. A demographic in 2016 indicated that the number of people living to be older than 65 was greater than those who are under 15, and the expected numbers of people who are 85 will triple shortly. The city's full of opportunities to engage in work, sports, culture, and events. For older people, that can be a bit of a challenge. Many people are living well, but there are others who don't fit that mold. You can travel, you can volunteer. When you retire, you can do all sorts of wonderful things. But what about the people who aren't in that situation? Living in place is a catchphrase that is used to define how, where, and under what circumstances they can continue as engaged members of the community. How can we benefit from their knowledge and support them as they age? Moira Welsh joins us today. Moira is a Toronto Star journalist leading the Third Act program, pushing for changes in the way older people live. The winner of 2 Canadian Association of Journalism Awards and 3 National Newspaper Awards, she is the author of Happily Ever Older, Revolutionary Approaches to Long-Term Care. You've been working on social issues for several years. Can you tell me what possessed you to get involved and what that journey looked like?
Well, I first started looking at long-term care many years ago in 2003, and the Toronto Star published a series that ran over a week and a half. And the series was led by a narrative that we called Natalie's Story. And Natalie was this a grandmother and a mom of a wonderful family woman who basically ended up with an improperly tended pressure ulcer on her tailbone. And her family was not aware of this. And when they ultimately found out, they had her taken to the hospital where she died a few days later. And I wrote this story as a narrative. And when the new incoming health minister, George Smitherman, at the time, he read the story, and I went and interviewed him in his office. And we talked about Natalie, and that is when he promised that he would hold a revolution into long-term care. And so that was sort of the beginning of my interest in these issues. There were some changes, and there was new legislation. There was a move to create a more rigorous inspection system. They apparently got rid of surprise inspections. But as I did more stories over time, I realized that nothing really changed. You can put all the paperwork in place, but the system just wasn't working. But as journalists, we will keep going back and doing more stories. And eventually, I came to the realization that I was repeating the same stories over and over again. So I had a debate with my editor when he wanted me to go back and do another piece. And I said, I've done this 30 times now. And we sort of had this little back and forth, as journalists and editors do. And he got somewhat huffy with me and said, then find a positive story then. And then he walked away. So I thought, okay. And that is ultimately what led me to a story about changes that the Region of Peel was making. And that's really started me on a different path altogether.
Your book, Happily Ever Older, explored many of the differences between long-term care facilities and nursing homes. And what did you find as you researched that and explored those issues?
Well, that was really interesting. That was inspired by the story that I did with the apparent transformation of a Peel Region dementia household. And I thought, okay, this seems quite interesting. What else is out there? What have we not seen yet? Because in Ontario, when we published the story, a lot of people had not heard of this model of care before. And so I thought, okay, so I went and traveled around North America and into the Netherlands to look at what people were doing with different ideas. So there were a couple of things. One piece that I found really interesting was just the concept of leadership and evolution. And the leaders who were really on the front line of creating change were not afraid to say, I made a mistake with this other idea. They moved forward constantly and evolved with the new thinking. And I found that really compelling. So there wasn't this real sense of defensiveness that I had detected in the Ontario system previously. What I found in those homes were basically a lot of the philosophies and ideas shared a DNA, which is really small spaces, small households, which are more natural, especially for people with cognitive decline whose world is shifting. And when you have a space that seems more familiar and more like your own home or close enough to your own home, then it's calming for people. Instead of a big institution with white hallways and linoleum floors and equipment lined up on the
White noise and
exactly. So this is a much cozier atmosphere. And so there were a lot of similarities around that. And the philosophy is basically um, enable people to participate in what they want to participate in, to help them explore their interests as much as possible, while at the same time enabling relationships between residents and residents, residents and staff, helping families become part of that mix instead of making them feel like outsiders, making them feel like they are part of a community. And I think that was helpful all the way around, especially to staff members, because the industry is really struggling with workers. It always has, and then since the pandemic, it has been much more difficult. But when you enable workers, first of all, to feel like they're making a difference in somebody's life, and that they're very connected to the family, that gives them a sense of accomplishment and a desire to keep moving forward.
yeah, a family member is in a long-term care facility, and my sister and I both joined the Family Councils of Ontario, which has various organizations. One's for residents, one's for family members, and the others for the staff themselves, to create dialogue, basically, to connect the dots, because so frequently in the previous administrations, they were so busy box checking to make sure that the amount of fluids in and out was the right amount, that pills had been taken, all that sort of thing. And that really didn't serve the residents. They weren't being connected to the staff. So now I see a different paradigm, and I don't know if it's the butterflies model or various other models that exist out there, but certainly the long-term care facility where my mom is starting to use color, having staff talk to people, listen to their stories, walk them around the building as opposed to putting them in front of a television set. And I think that these are all valuable things to be doing, and certainly shows a willingness, as you say, of the staff to become more involved in the lives of people who they serve.
It is changing. I think the system took a while, but I think people have really caught on to these new ideas. And whether it's Butterfly or the Eden Alternative, or just the City of Toronto has its own model that they created, or it's just sort of common sense and caring for people, which is in many ways what it comes down to. It's changing to that style of life in a home compared to the old institutional model, as you're talking about checking off boxes or making sure someone gets up every morning at 6:30 a.m. You push them down to the dining room, whisk away their plates after 30 minutes, and put them in front of the TV, and that is an inhuman way to exist.
Exactly. I mean, we're talking about older people who we love and care for, who have contributed so much to our lives, and yet we treat them as objects.
Well, it's a form of ageism and ableism, frankly.
Ableism is the discrimination of and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. Ageism refers to a socially constructed way of thinking about older persons based on negative attitudes and stereotypes about aging.
When you're a certain age or you have certain disabilities, that you don't really count, that you've become less of a human, so you're just really sitting there taking up space. And that has really been proven to be an untenable way to exist. And I think we're seeing more and more homes moving away from that. It's not perfect at all, but there's an acceptance and less defensiveness about that traditional model of care and more willingness to move forward.
And does that take more money or time than the traditional methods? I know that recently the ministry has mandated that residents get 4 hours of care as opposed to what was happening before, which was here's your pills, see you later. Now, to mandate that, if a resident requires more time or more attention, how does that work?
So the 4 hours is an average, and that will, I think it will take another year or so before we get there. And they are hiring more staff, they say, to meet that 4 hour average. And there are challenges because some staff are being lured away, so to speak, by different organizations or third-party healthcare providers and so on. But nonetheless, if we move forward believing that the 4 hours of care will actually be there, then there are supposed to be extra staff. When I talk to Advantage Ontario, which represents the not-for-profit homes, they say that this promise in this legislation by the Ontario government will enable them to provide emotion-centered or more relational care. So there is a belief within the industry that this will help simply because you have more staff. You do need to have time to sit and talk to people. You can't be racing around trying to meet a quota of whatever that quota may be when you're also supposed to be sitting and holding someone's hand or listening to their story or helping them through a challenging moment or memory. So you need to have the ability, the flexibility. And also, in some homes, what I found was really interesting was that the frontline workers were given the autonomy to make decisions, not medical decisions, but relationship decisions that would really benefit them, that they inherently understood would benefit the people they worked with.
I remember one of the stories you told about, I think it was in the States, where there was somebody who would actually go to bed with the residents so that they would not wander.
Absolutely, and that was part of the butterfly program, and they supported wearing your pajamas if you're on the night shift, because then that makes everyone understand that it's nighttime and it's time to go to bed. But this one woman would walk through the hallways in her nightgown and didn't like to sleep, and so it occurred to her that she needed more. And so when the woman went to bed, the worker had her pajamas on and she curled up in bed with her. And she talked to the family about this first and they were fine. And the woman went to sleep.
And that's so wonderful, is having that personal connection, which is so important to living in place. Challenge that I see currently, there are a lot of groups that they don't feel welcome. In a nursing home, for example, gay people will hide their gayness because they don't want to be disparaged or centered out in any way. The Rakai Center started in a facility which I think will house something like 12 older gay people. As the people who are currently in that facility move to other locations or pass away. So I think that there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of being smaller, more capable of creating the small homes, and also integrated into the society. What do you think about the communal aspect of long-term care?
It's incredibly important. And some homes are still, I mean, we are still building big box homes in Ontario. We have a massive construction plan to build a significant number of homes. And many of those are big square buildings with hundreds of people living in them. While at the same time, we know that through studies through COVID, that the smaller households helped to mitigate the number of infections and deaths in some homes.
Well, certainly single bed, single person is essential to that
Yes.
sort of thing, because you don't want to have people sharing a room in their home.
Yes,
It's like being 6 years old again.
And often there were 4 people to a room, and now it's down to 2 and 1 in Ontario. So you could have a shared room. Also, it's a little bit more affordable for some people as well to share a room. So that is a consideration also, because the residents also do a copay. But back to your point about, for example, cultural connections and awareness. Yes, for example, gay people have often spoken about being forced to go back and hide who they are. And I know some homes are really trying to work with the frontline staff to discuss those issues and say, you know, this is who we are in Canada. This is how we live.
There is training at the independent organizations who supply the PSWs to become sensitive.
Yes.
I was part of an art project. We created a community art project that PSWs and people who are gay collaborated on to show the challenges of connecting and talking to each other and being in the same space. And it really turned out to be quite a wonderful event over a period of weeks. And I think that by talking to people, by understanding them, because if you don't talk to people, you don't understand them, you can't possibly know them. And whether that's the Chinese community or Macedonian community or language is another issue. If there aren't people on site who speak the language of the residents, and many people as they age and develop dementia, fall back into their original language. And that's also a challenge, I think.
It absolutely is. And it's very helpful if you have a community around you where you could even bring in, even if it's not a staffer, if it's a volunteer or somebody from the outside. That's really, really important. And when you talk about creating community and bringing community into the homes, and I was mentioning a lot of them are going to be big box, but some of them are not. Some of them are purposely putting themselves on, for example, university grounds. In Trent University, there is a plan to build a long-term care home there.
Trent's vision is for a university-integrated seniors village, anchored by a long-term care home on the northwest corner of Water Street and Woodland Drive.
And they will bring students in from the university, but they're also close to a path for people to walk through the forests. There is a desire, I believe, to have a Tim Hortons nearby, or maybe it already is. I just know that played a role in some of the decision making. And so there are these conversations of building community. So you've got perhaps a retirement home, or you've got apartments, and then you've got a retirement home, and then a long-term care home, and a library or a daycare center. And so you've got sort of a mix of people coming and going of all ages as well. And so I think that's really, really key. When I was in the Netherlands, I went to it's called De Hogevik, and a lot of people refer to it as the Dementia Village, although they don't seem to like that name. But the man who helped design it, and they have little tiny homes of roughly 7 people in each little home, and they make dinner together, or they have like a little store where they will come and do their shopping and go back and have a glass of wine before the meal, or somebody might help the worker cook and so on. But he said that if he could do it over again, he would have opened it up to the community so that people were coming and going, and there would be a way to keep the residents safe, but there would also be a way to bring the community inside, not just for certain events, but on a daily, ongoing basis.
Yeah, you mentioned ageism earlier, and I think that that's one of the challenges, is that people think that once you're over 55, if you're not independently wealthy, you've somehow disappeared and you have problems. And some people do develop problems, whether it's physical problems or mental health problems. You need to have that community in order to talk to each other and to interact with each other. I know that the facility where my mom is at, they're talking about building a new building, and they're actually going to have a daycare in the facility, because I think older people really love children, and they love to interact with them, and children seem to really get off on playing with older people as well, generally speaking.
And to build on that, there's a home in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, And it has a daycare, but it also has an elementary class. And they come every day. And some of the residents who would have been teachers or professors in their time will come and teach and work with the students. So that's also a really interesting way of creating intergenerational relationships.
Yeah, I know that in the larger community outside of long-term care, there's a growing need to live in place. Um, there was a study done by Dixon Hall that showed that 85% of the homeless people would prefer to be housed. Go figure, you know? And I'm not sure that isn't also true of older people who want to stay at home and live in place. So how can we possibly, I know, for example, there are like 100 different organizations in East Toronto that are there to help older people. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of coordination and guidance for older people to access, particularly if they don't have computer skills, to access the facilities that are available to them in order to be comfortable and live in place.
So that makes me think of one of my favorite topics, which is NORCs, naturally occurring retirement communities. And when the STARS Third Act project launched, that was the series that we launched with. I went to New York City, which is where NORCs with supports originated, and spent a lot of time talking to people down there. And what I saw, this won't answer your question entirely, but there are a lot of communities in the Toronto area that have buildings, condos and apartments, or neighborhoods. You can have vertical NORCs or horizontal NORCs that would really benefit from these ideas. And these ideas would be a social convener, so to speak, or somebody who would be able to direct you if you had questions about where you should go for certain health benefits or programs. They can help you figure that out. And in-house, a lot of the residents who live there are retired and they have energy and skills, and they are organizing programs now, and they're bringing people together for social activities, for yoga, Pilates. They bring in public health resources. There's one that I'm going to be writing about soon, and they have created something for men, because older men can often become quite isolated. Women seem to be, I don't want to generalize, but women seem to be a little more social or connected, and maybe men like to stay home and watch the game or something. So they got their husbands and the different men together, and they started a dining group, and now they go to a restaurant in Etobicoke, and it's like a pretty decent restaurant, and it has a lot of pool tables in it. So they play pool once a week. They all get together. And that is a consistent thing. And so new friendships have developed through that, and people have also started volunteering and created a new sense of purpose for themselves in retirement. And it's just a very engaging, energizing community. And that's part of the UHN NORC Innovation Center. And this one that I'm talking about is a do-it-yourself NORC, they call it. And the NORC Innovation Center is also helping some with more hands-on supports to develop these programs. Apparently, the call or the demand for this is, I don't think I'm too far off by saying off the charts. There's a lot of interest in that. Yeah. In Halton Region, the first building was in Burlington, and they brought in all the same programs, and very similar to the PACE program in the States, which is focused on helping people age in place. So they had a woman who is a personal support worker, but she's there full time, sort of like a den mother, so to speak. And she might, if she doesn't see someone who has signed up for the program, then if she hasn't seen them for a while, she might go to their apartment and knock on the door, and if they invite her inside, she might sort of look around and see how they're doing. You can sort of tell if someone needs help or not, and maybe she'll peek in the fridge and see if they have enough food. So nutrition is also really important. So these are all these sort of interactive programs that really work because of the relationships that you build with people. But what's also interesting from the data perspective is that the Burlington, Ontario Health Team did a study on the residents in this one home, and they discovered that for those who had chronic conditions such as asthma or congestive heart disease or similar type of COPD, their trips to the hospital emergency department had declined. And when they did go to the hospital and were admitted, their stays were shorter in time. And that's very similar to the findings that NORCs in New York City found.
That completes part 1 of the conversation. Please join us for part 2 of this podcast. Available right where you found this one.